Welcome to the Radults podcast. We are back with season 2 starting this episode. Today's guest is Carmelo Chimera, who is an attorney by day, comic book writer by night. So please stay tuned to this episode and enjoy. We have journeyed across the ocean to chat with Carmelo Chimera in Chicago. For our listeners out there, tell us, who are you and what do you do?
Well, I am an attorney by day, comic book store owner by night, and comic book author by even later in the night.
Do you sleep?
I slept once. It was January 2014. It was awesome. It was so much fun. I was still trying to do it again, but I haven't had time to calendar it.
You know what? I almost believe you that could be the right time.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate this last year. I got married back in June, and my wife is good about keeping me on a schedule better. So if I'm up till 1 a.m. frantically working on a project, she comes down and says, "Hey, that's enough. It's time for bed." Yeah, thank God for her.
Now, you're a jack of all trades, but would you consider yourself a master of any of them?
That's part of the reason why I sort of made news recently, is because I sort of made a public confession that I don't think I'm very good at anything that I do. I guess some people would disagree, but I've been very dissatisfied with myself lately, and I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute. But I really do actually think I'm a decent writer. I think I've got a lot of concepts that are novel, and I think that I have a knack of combining things that are entertaining on the surface, but have a deeper level of meaning and import that might help a reader learn more about themselves or the world around them. And at least that's what I aspire to do. And I really believe in myself in that regard. And I think I'm also very creative, from like a marketing perspective. I think because I really love engaging with people. And that's all marketing is how do you connect with people and like genuinely build trust and make them care. And so I think those are probably the two things I'm actually good at.
When it comes to you marketing, how do you feel that you went about building your fan base?
So, when you build a fan base for anything, and I started with my comic book stores, right? I started with Chimera's Comics 8 years ago, and we expanded to a second location 2 years after that. And then I transitioned that into a comic book publishing company that centered around, or originally centered around my written work, and later brought in other creators. So when we started with the store, it was a different mindset. It was a mindset of trying to reach people locally, right? So you try to find where the people are in your neighborhood. And then when you try to branch out into something like publishing, where now I'm not limited geographically, right? I can ship my books all over. I can use Kickstarter in most countries in the world. So once you go global, you realize it's actually the same thing. Only now it's not geography that you're trying to screen by, it's just interests. And that's what's really cool, is like for every aspiring any author or artist out there, like there is somebody in the world who wants what you're making. I guarantee it. There's 8 billion people. And so that's kind of my approach to building the fan base, is sort of finding those people who like the thing that you're making. And it's really that simple, even though maybe I've oversimplified it.
I think that's really good advice and a really useful insight to all sorts of creatives. I mean, personally, I'm a musician as well as being the podcast host, and I work in content creation as well at a university. And I feel that in all three of my roles, the marketing aspect of it is probably the part that's the hardest. But It sounds like you found a logical approach that actually generates results.
Yeah, it does generate results. And that's what makes me, I guess that's why I risk saying that I'm good at it, even though that sounds maybe arrogant to think that I'm decent at it, is that I have seen results, right? My first graphic novel came out, we kickstarted it in 2015, and we raised $8,000 to print it. That was 3 years ago. Well, my next project I did in December of this last year, Cellar Door, is a horror book. This one raised over 12,000. So it's not a one-trick thing. It's not a fluke, and it's growing, right? And so I think that's what makes me comfortable to say that it's a successful approach. And what you're really looking at when I say that is it's a framework, right? It's a framework by which you can plug in all these things, because marketing is overwhelming, right? Marketing is advertising, it's positioning, it's, you know, press contacts, and it's a lot of those things. So when you can have a framework like I've described to you, and then all those things can make sense, whereas otherwise they seem like chaos.
Kickstarter is a very valuable thing, but it also becomes very dangerous when put in the hands of people that don't exactly know what they're doing, or, you know, bite off more than they can chew, which is a common occurrence with Kickstarter campaigns. So I guess you've learnt that what works for you. You've learnt, I guess, how to not stretch yourself too thin that you can't make good on the things that you're offering. So I think that's what a lot of people look for when it comes to Kickstarter and getting all of that.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, because as you might know, 9% of Kickstarters never fulfill their rewards, just ever. And that's globally, not just comic books. So it's, you know, that's a huge risk to begin with, you're asking people to take. And then couple that with the fact that a lot of campaigns that seem successful are the ones that then don't fulfill. You know, the most famous one is the Coolest Cooler, that I think made 13 million, something like that. At the time it was, the most funded Kickstarter campaign. That I do know for sure. And the problem was, as the campaign did better and better, they kept promising more bells and whistles and adding more and more features. And then what that did was it drove the price. Like they couldn't scale the project big enough for the audience they got. And a project that might have worked at a small scale didn't grow. And a lot of people would have been happy with the cooler that they were promised in the first place. Only now they were promised this much better cooler that they're never going to see. And that relates to comics directly, because there's all kinds of ways you can trick out your book or your comic Kickstarter, or even your, you know, you mentioned you're a musician, even as a musician, there's all sorts of things you could do. You could go from doing your digital EP to a vinyl printing, and that's like it's a totally new thing you've just added. And people do that with comics all the time, where they start off making their comic and now they're making a hardcover, and now the hardcover glows in the dark and it's got a foil embossed logo. And all of a sudden it's like, well, I don't have the money to print this kind of book. Like, what? So
I've decided my next comic book, the stretch goal is going to be it becomes a pop-up comic book.
That is literally the best idea I've ever heard. Nothing could go wrong with that. You should do that.
I personally think you're underselling yourself here. I think it should fund its own Netflix series.
Can we make it that like it has like scratch and sniff on the TV as well?
Yes.
And like the panels each pop out of the TV screen.
This is stuff. They're going to unearth this podcast episode in like 20 years, and they're going to say, these were the oracles who predicted the future of entertainment.
Anyway, before we predict too much more, because it gets dangerous and we'll have like the CIA and everything knocking down our doors, we're going to get away from that. You're an attorney. You work at Chimera's Comics at the LaGrange location, and now you've established the new publishing branch that you've got going. How and where do you find the time to do all of that?
You know, the secret for the last few years to doing all of it was compartmentalizing. So, you know, you have to schedule time for the things you want to do. And that includes leisure time. It includes family time. If you do not make time, then it won't ever happen. You know, I always tell people you won't find time. You have to make time. And that's challenging, right? Because there's still, no matter how I want to carve it up, there's still only 24 hours in a day. I had a college professor tell me, Carmelo, you experience 3 full days in what to the rest of us is a single 24-hour period. And I think that was true when I was in my early 20s. But now that I'm an old man in my late 20s, is not quite the case. That's why I decided to give away my Oak Lawn store recently, is because I'm not juggling those things well anymore.
You're giving away a comic book store. That sounds insane. You should definitely elaborate.
Yeah, I've been accused of being insane before, so I wear the title proudly. I don't think that's anything to be ashamed of. No one changes the world by following the rules, as they say. Yeah, so I recently I came to the revelation that I could be very successful publishing if I could spend more time on it. And you got to do things like go to conventions and make in-person appearances and stuff that just like isn't scalable. Like I can only do so much electronically. I've got to do in-person stuff. And also I'm slow at fulfilling my Kickstarters. I fulfill them. I'm about 6 months late on one right now. And that's not terrible by Kickstarter standards, but I hold myself to a higher standard. So when I realized I wasn't doing well, I thought, well, what do I have to get rid of? What can I get rid of, right? And I can't really get rid of being an attorney. It's my primary source of income still. Not getting rid of family time, right? I'm purposely trying to grow my family by getting married and so forth. That's a priority. So then it leaves me with like the stores, and I love the stores. So I realized I had to split them, right? So I've got two, and I'm going to keep the LaGrange store, and decided to give away the Oak Lawn one. I can tell you later why I chose the one I chose, but that's why I decided to get out of it. Why give it away instead of sell it or close it? Well, closing it seemed like a waste, but selling it, now that was something that felt cold, right? Selling it is what I do as an attorney. I'm in mergers and acquisitions, right? So we like buy and sell things all day long. And just because someone has the fattest wallet doesn't mean they're going to run the best comic book store. So when I thought about giving it away, that's what it was, this like lightning in a bottle moment. And I had the idea at like 4:00 in the afternoon. And I had made the public announcement like 3 days later. That's how quickly I put it together. Because I realized this was going to be something once in a lifetime for me and for whoever wins this store. This was going to be the thing I can point to and say, hey, this is when I was able to give back. This is when I was able to pay it forward and maybe spread a little hope to a business and really a world that really needs it right now. We really need hope, I think.
And more comic stores.
And more comic book stores. Absolutely. Yeah, it's been a bad couple of years for comic book stores generally. I think 50 or 60 of them closed last year. And I just read an article today in Bleeding Cool about a store in Europe that is the oldest comic book store that is closing. And it really makes me sad. And that's why closing my store wasn't an option. And even selling it didn't seem like a good option because, the new owner might run it into the ground. Now, whoever I give the store to might also run it into the ground, but I have a chance to pick somebody that I think has the passion and creativity to do otherwise, right? To do great with it.
To some, it may sound like a dream to own their own comic book store, and maybe it is, or can be, but let's be transparent for a moment. What are some oversights that people could be missing when opening a comic book store?
Well, I think that's a fantastic question because I do hear all the time, oh, this is my dream job. Oh, this is what I want to do. And I think as a threshold matter, people, I mean, not everybody, but I think a lot of people come in and they see the person at the comic book store reading comics or watching television, and they think, oh, this is the life. This is what I want to do to make money. And the truth is, like, maybe some people are blowing off work by doing that. But if you come into the store and someone's reading a comic book, that's market research, right? That's product research. And it might be enjoyable, but it's still work, right? At the end of the day, it's still a job. And owning a small business is a lot of hard work. It doesn't matter what kind of business it is, whether it's comic books or a restaurant or a bar. There's a lot to it, and there's going to be a lot that's frankly really, really boring. Accounting is boring. The legal work is boring. Running the store, it doesn't really matter what you sell. A lot of the rules of retail apply. You could be selling widgets, but you still need to learn how to deal with customers and help the customers and have the right selection. And so it doesn't matter, right? What does make a difference is that comics are fun. So while you're doing your purchasing and decorating your store and planning your events and talking to your customers, it's about a shared passion, right? So that is really awesome. And it really does set it apart. But the rest of the work is still there. And I don't think I've been secretive about it. I even mentioned it in my live stream last week that, hey, I'm giving someone a dream job, but I'm giving someone a job. This is work. It's going to be a lot of work. So you're right.
Yeah, I think that's something that people don't understand, is that as much as you can love and enjoy something, if that's your life source and that's where you're making your income from, then no matter what, it is work and it is a job. And there has to be the books that are being kept and balanced. There's, paying employees and wages. There's dealing with diamond distribution, and
Yep.
everyone knows how much of a hassle that can be.
Mhm.
And then also you've got to go be right by the customers and do right by the customers as well.
Yeah, I think you sound like you would be uniquely suited to run a very good comic book store, because I think you do have a good grasp of what it takes. And dealing with the customers is, that's a lot harder than it sounds like too, because first of all, a lot of our customers are great. I'm really, really blessed with great customers, and many of them are involved in our Facebook community group, and that's a fun place for us all to chat. But, for every really good customer, there's customers who are, even if they're nice people, they can be persnickety, or they can be very particular, and you need to be able to meet their needs in order to keep their business. And then there are people who come at you and they're outright rude or hostile. And what's the appropriate response there, right? Do we want to fight those people and make enemies and upset people? Do we want to try to accommodate them? And it's probably more that second thing. Abraham Lincoln said, "Do I not destroy my enemies when I make friends of them?" And I think even hostile customers can become friends when you treat them with respect and dignity, and you take care of them, But some folks, frankly, will cross a line. As the owner, you're the one now that has to say no. You've got to know when to say enough's enough. I had a customer come into the store the other day. I wasn't there. My manager was there. And I'm going to use a bad word now, guys. I'm sorry. You can bleep me out if you don't like it. But he said, he walks in, he's not there for 2 minutes, and he says, "I really don't like Chris Evans. He came in and he made Captain America a libtard." And my manager is like floored, because she loves Captain America. She loves Chris Evans, and then this guy, by the way, proceeds to like bend and drop a copy of the new issue of Walking Dead and then leave the store without buying anything, right? And it's like, that's not most of our customers. That does not happen often. But when it does, it's like, well, how far out of the way should I go to make this customer happy, right? And how far will I go before it's to the exclusion of other customers, right? Customers who maybe are more inclusive. I don't know if that makes sense, if you guys can kind of see where I'm going with that, but that's a challenge that you negotiate every day as an owner.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely important, particularly in the unique environment of a comic book store, that you do consider what the rest of your clientele or customer base wants from your store. And it's likely their safe place. So to have someone that comes in and disrupts that, irrespective of whether or not they make a purchase, and in this case, the person hasn't, but irrespective of whether or not they do, what they are doing via their actions could have a detrimental impact on your business, because it could turn someone off coming back.
Yeah, and I think that this guy really needs like a good ear twig as well.
Yeah, I think that's right. And you make a good point there that, just to elaborate on is, it doesn't, like you said, irrespective of whether or not they make a purchase, right? Because at the end of the day, you have to decide, what kind of business you want to run and what do you want to stand for? And then what kind of customers are you going to attract by doing that? And so, at the end of the day, maybe it's not worth it if he makes a purchase. Maybe he makes a big purchase and it's still not worth it. You have to, you can't compromise your principles for money. And man, is that easier said than done when your electric bill depends on it, or when your employees are counting on you, to make your payroll and stuff. That is big talk, to say, "Oh no, my principles are more important than the money." But sometimes it's true. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is, I believe that good morals leads to good business. I think inclusiveness leads to good business. And it's, they feed each other. Which is not to say you should be moral to make money, but it is to say that, like, if I make my place, this is very simple. If I make my place inclusive to only like straight white men, then only straight white men will shop in my store. But if I make my store inclusive to men and women, black and white, gay and straight, young and old, I just multiplied my customer base like 100-fold. So just on the surface of it is like, can't we see how being good to each other is good business? It's the heart of good business.
I think
Sorry, I got too real for you guys. Yeah.
No, it's all right.
I think it's perfect time for a rad break.
Yeah, me too. All right, so we're going to play a game with you now, which is a regular feature on our podcast. It's known as a rad break. Essentially, we will ask you a fun question, and you will respond to it accordingly.
Okay.
I do want to point out that obviously this is comic book related, and that these opinions are your own and aren't standing in line with your store. So you don't want to jeopardize anything.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay, so after you've set him up to be scared and have his lawyer hat on, his attorney hat on, let's go forward with the ridiculousness that it actually is. So this game is called Rad or Fad. We are going to ask you a simple question, and you are going to tell us whether that thing is rad and should continue forever, or is fad and should quite simply F off and die.
I love it. This is great. I will tell you though, as an attorney, anytime someone says this is a simple question or this is a simple project, that's how I know I've gotten in too deep.
Marvel and DC rebooting their comic series every 2 years, rad or fad?
Fad. Ugh. Do I get to elaborate, or is this a lightning round?
Yeah. Oh, you can elaborate.
Go for it.
Yeah, so the thing is, like, when you reboot every 2 years, it's a gimmick. We know it's a gimmick. It makes it hard for retailers to order because I always base my orders on the previous month's numbers. If you're rebooting, those numbers are now like that much less reliable. And as a fan, it kills your sense of connection to the material if it's constantly rebooting. Does that mean these things should not be accessible for new users? Absolutely not. It should absolutely be accessible for new readers all the time, which is why I think Marvel and DC should both move completely away from the ongoing comic book model, and they should move toward like a Netflix model where each comic book is a self-contained series of a predetermined length, whether it's 6 issues or 12 issues. So, it'd be like Spider-Man 2099, it's 12 issues long, and then it ends, the end. And then if we like it, we can always do another run at it, and it'd be like Spider-Man 2099 part 2 or something like that. And if we don't like it, that's fine, it ended. Right? Stories with endings tend to be a lot more impactful. Some of the most memorable comic stories of all time, Watchmen, V for Vendetta, these stories like end. They're finite. And I think that sequel model, you see it a lot. You see it nowadays in American television, but you've always seen it in like British television where each season, they weren't even seasons, they were series, right? And it was series 1, and then that was it. Maybe we did series 2, maybe we did series 3. I think that's going to be more accessible for people in the long run. It's going to allow for more regular release of titles because you can have different creative teams teeing up the next series. And then you can have people who are like, oh, wow, I really like this Spider-Man title. I can't wait for this other Spider-Man series that's going to come out soon. I think that's going to be a little bit better. And then it kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Sidesteps the reboot thing,
Absolutely. I think that with this as well, there's nothing saying that a series or a story arc cannot finish at, let's say, issue 6 or issue 12, and even 6 months down the track, they can still like pick up, at issue 7 or issue 13, even with a different creative team. I mean, for me as a consumer and a reader of comics, my biggest issue with it is that if I go and pick up the latest series of Silver Surfer and I enjoy it, and then it ends at, issue 12, and then it comes back only months later. It's pretty much in the previews catalog straight away as soon as it's cancelled. And should I be excited for that when the creative team could potentially change, and automatically a store, rightfully so and wrongfully so at the same time, puts it on my standing order because I previously had that series?
Yeah, that's the nail. I think you hit the nail on the head. That's exactly the problem. You know, you face it as a consumer, we face it as the retailer. And I'll tell you what, for every customer I pull it for and say, hey, I know you used to get Silver Surfer. Here's the new one, and they say thank you. There's another customer who says, I didn't ask for this. Why did you put this in my box? And it's like I can't make everybody happy at all. So yeah.
Now, being an attorney and working in comics, that's not a natural, obvious fit. Do you feel that working as an attorney has actually helped with your understanding of how to, of best practice in the comic business at all?
Yeah, it has. I think there's a lot in a small business that, ends up being quasi legal in the sense of like dealing with vendors, negotiating contracts, negotiating leases, certainly with landlords. Um, and then when you make terms of service or subscription agreements where you need to have terms of use for the customers, all those things are contractual. Even in terms of like corporate planning, how you structure your business entity and so forth, these are all concerns that my experience as an attorney has been able to inform. If you do not have experience with these things and you're trying to start a small business, you need a lawyer. You should not use, lawyersareus.com and download some do-it-yourself forms. The forms are what they are, but they cannot tell you which forms you need, right? You just like hear about it and you think, oh, well, that's what I need. And that's not how it works. So please, for the love of God, hire a lawyer. I need to hire an accountant. I tried to do my own accounting the first couple of years. I made a tremendous mess of things. I could have done it so much more simply than I did it. I did it the hardest way possible. And can I do accounting? Sure. I can do basic accounting for a small company like mine. Does that mean I can do it well or fast or efficient? No. It'll take me 4 times, 5 times as long as an accountant would to do my accounting. And that's time I should be spending doing marketing or things like that I enjoy. So yes, being a lawyer has helped my comic book store a lot.
Speaking of small businesses, like you just mentioned, you founded a publishing line for Chimeras. How did that come about?
Well, it's funny. The comic book publishing actually was planned first. I wrote my first graphic novel in college, and I showed it to a friend who started to draw it for me. And he and I met working at a comic book store in high school. So that's how we were connected to begin with. So when that store was closing, he said, hey, why don't we open our own store? And I said, well, let's find out if it's possible, because I don't ever like to turn down an opportunity unless I know if it's possible. Otherwise, it's just sour grapes, right? So I looked into it. It turned out to be feasible, and we opened the store. Now, opening the store put a tremendous delay in our graphic novel, but I always believed in the message of that story, right? It's a story about a teenage superhero who is experimented on, he's captured, and in the end, when he escapes, he has to decide whether or not to take revenge or whether he can still be a hero after all the bad things that have happened to him in his life. And I really, really believe in the core of this story. And the older I got, the more true it got. So years later now, it's 2015, and I'm thinking about Kickstarter, and I say to myself, if we make this big public commitment to finish the book and we take money from people and promise them a product, well, then we're going to have to finish it. Then we're going to make time. Like I told you before, right? You can't find time. You have to make it. And this is going to put a gun to our head and force us to make it, because we're not going to let people down. That's not an option for us. And sure enough, it still took us 2 years later to finish it. But because we had this Kickstarter, there were people asking us, hey, when's the book coming out? When's the book coming out? And that's what helped us get it done. Well, when I saw what we could do with Kickstarter, when I first held this book in my hand, this beautiful hardcover that I had conceived of 9 years earlier, I knew I was addicted to making more comics and making more books. So I wrote a prose adaptation. I edited and contributed to a horror anthology, which I mentioned previously. I have 2 projects being drawn as we speak, and I have projects lined up, 3 projects lined up for 2020. So it's like everything is in like a different stage of development. And I guess that's when I sort of realized that like, yep, I can do this. I can run a publishing company because I have people who are very talented who want me to put out their stuff, and I have my own stuff that I want to put out, and now I have a means to do it.
Awesome. That sounds amazing. So when you're making a choice on what comic books you're going to publish, how do you decide on that? And what's kind of the major thing you're looking for in a comic?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as it stands right now, my big concern is because since I just got started with this, and like I said, I've seen repeat success, so it's enough where I know it's not a fluke. Right now I'm most concerned with publishing stuff that's closest to completion. I had written a 24-page comic book as opposed to my first 2 things were much larger graphic novel projects. And so this comic book is like really close to being done. And so I thought, well, we're going to run with this next because it's close. And that might not be the best way to pick projects because I still want to pick quality projects. But right now I have a bunch of quality projects on the table. It's completion and closeness of completion that's my number one factor. As I start to take on more work from writers and artists outside of myself, as I start to publish more for other people, I guess I just want to look for stuff that is very unique and has a niche that we can find online and build that community online and say, hey, I know this is a really weird comic, but I bet you there are people out there who want this weird thing. I guess globally, though, I told you before that I wanted to write books that also had like a level of meaning. So it is my hope to make stories that matter. I want to choose stories that I think need to be told for whatever reason that is. It gets a little bit harder with some of the horror stuff we've done, but I think of it more as like Twilight Zone kind of horror. So it's still meant to sort of challenge, your world. I'm sorry I'm so long-winded, but I get so excited talking about this stuff, guys. I apologize.
Never apologize for being passionate about anything.
Thank you.
Unless it's about murder. Maybe apologize about being passionate.
Oh, I like you guys.
So does that mean that we're going to have a Radults podcast comic book come out 2020?
If you guys have a story you want to make, I love it. It's a great idea.
Yeah, it's us like wanting to interview people that are dead, and we actually go and look for like psychics that can talk to these people, and then we find out that the media thinks that we're fraudulent with our interviews. However, then through fact checking, they find out that it's all true. And then that's when Satan comes and grabs us and going, why are you interviewing people without my permission?
My God, I love that. That's a great idea.
That was just off
the... Yeah, I've never even thought about that before. That just happened.
Dude, I thought that was like a pitch because I'm like, you sold me. But you know what? I almost wonder if it would be a great comic book, but that would be a really cool podcast, right? As if the podcast was the story and you sort of broke the fourth wall with the podcast. And so you were doing these interviews and then you were also like commenting on the ongoing controversy around your podcast so that you sort of like, you're doing the podcast that the story is about at the same time. I love meta stuff like that kind of breaks the format and uses the format to its advantage. Or if we did a comic book, you could have a tie-in podcast at the same time.
That's very meta.
It is very meta. That is some meta marketing.
So
Oh,
talking
guys, we're
about
going to talk when this is over. This is great.
yeah, this is going to be 100% just happening. It's happening now. So speaking about different media platforms and everything, comics that have movies tied to them that are based off those comics, do you think that they help or harm the comic book industry as a whole?
Are you talking about a comic book adaptation of a movie, or are you just talking about a movie that was inspired by a particular comic story?
Movie inspired by comics, like the Avengers, Black Panther,
Okay,
all
okay, I
those
got you.
sort of.
Yeah, sorry to clarify, because sometimes they'll do like, Avengers Infinity War, the official comic book adaptation of the film. And that always seems dumb because it's like it's a comic adapting a movie that adapted comics, and they're never very good, and they never really add anything to the experience. So that's something. Anyways, yeah, what do I think of movies inspired by comic books? I think it's very natural. I think comic books are a visual medium to begin with, so I think they naturally translate to film in a way that maybe prose does not always do. Obviously, there's a lot of great movies based on prose, but uh, you know, very stereotypically, the book was always better, as they say. And with comic books, I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think a lot of the movies we've seen are pretty high quality, and I think they distill decades of complicated, convoluted lore and they try to distill the best parts of it. And I think you end up with a more refined product that's made with the benefit of hindsight and made by people who genuinely have a lot of affection for the material. Take, for example, Aquaman that just came out. There have been a number of reboots and versions of him, pre-crisis, post-crisis, and so forth. And they've all added something to it. The movie did a good job of pulling in a lot of elements from different places and weaving them together into one cohesive narrative.
Do you find that when a movie comes out based off of a comic book series like Aquaman, as a store owner, does that increase your sales for that
Yeah,
title?
without a doubt, because it expands the number of people who've heard of that character and who are potentially interested in that character. Take, for example, Ant-Man. 10 years ago when I opened my store, if I had to only sell Ant-Man comics, I would have been closed in a week. But that movie comes out and everybody hears about Ant-Man, thinks he's funny, thinks he's cool. Now all of a sudden I have little kids coming into the store saying, I want an Ant-Man comic. That's really something, because before you really relied on your household names, your Superman and Spider-Man and Batman, basically. And now Iron Man and Thor and Doctor Strange are household names.
Speaking of comics, what current comic books would you recommend for anyone wanting to start reading them? We know it's an evolving business. So what's out there now that you think would be a great starting point?
Oh, that's a great question. A starting point for new readers. I think, it's maybe not ongoing right now, but the graphic novels would be readily available. I think some of the best superhero stuff we've gotten in years is the Camilla Khan Miss Marvel comic that is out. And I mean, she's, like I said, a couple years now, but still relatively recent. You could still get the first, volumes of the graphic novel. I think that's a great introduction for people. Um, I'm not, I'm not sure what off the shelf right now feels like I could give it to somebody who's never read before, which is probably a problem. Um, hmm. Yeah, you've stumped me a little bit. Maybe if I were in my store and could look at my selection, I could brainstorm a bit. But there's certainly a lot of good comics out right now. But I think a lot of them are sort of building off of the lore. I guess in the last year, maybe year and a half, they did Wonder Woman, a Wonder Woman relaunch where they did like Wonder Woman Year One or Earth One or something like that. Year One, and that was some of the best Wonder Woman comics ever. And that kind of went back to her early days. So that's something too, I think, is great for new readers. But as you pointed out, they're constantly rebooting, right? So nowadays you could probably grab anything and, just start with number one.
I like the choice of Wonder Woman. I do. I think it's perfect for the time, and I think it. Let's be honest. Comic books have traditionally been perceived to be a male thing, and it's great that that there is more accessibility for female or femme identifying folk in the comic scene at the moment. And I think Wonder Woman's probably the best starting point I could think of. So good choice.
Thank you.
I would probably go as far as starting point, and we've got the hype going on. I would go Captain Marvel. He's a good one as well.
Yeah.
And also one that maybe people don't always say, and I really, really like two of these people. I think that you've got Squirrel Girl, amazing character, and I would also say Spider-Gwen.
Excellent. Yes. If you lived in America, I would give you a job at my store. I think you're really nailing it. Yeah.
So I want to expand a little bit on the question that we've just asked about recommending comics, and also expanding upon your talks about Kickstarter and having a store. If you had an indie creator come to you with their books, what would you say to them that you're looking for to get their books on your shelves?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the thing is, you really want a professional looking project in the end. I think you can never make a comic book or any project that everybody is going to like, but you can make something if you're careful and you use the tools that are available and you spend the money. You can make something that looks professional. And I think that's big. If you made a comic book and it's not the normal comic book trim size, or if you made a graphic novel and the binding is bad and it looks like it's falling apart, or you printed it on cheaper stock, that's going to count against you, because I don't know your work. I don't know the level of quality inside the work, and the presentation is going to send a strong signal to me about what's inside there. The second thing is, have a barcode. You absolutely need an ISBN barcode. They can be expensive. You can buy them in bulk and they're very cheap. You have to have a barcode. Otherwise, it's very hard to take it seriously, and it's very hard to sell it. I have a computerized electronic point of sale system. What am I supposed to do if it doesn't have a barcode, right? It's not, even if I want to carry it. So, and I do for some of my friends who have really excellent books, I carry a few without barcodes, but I want to smack them upside the head when I see them and ask them why they couldn't get it. So those are probably two concrete things I think I would offer people.
ISBN labels, people. Get those barcodes on your books. We'll start winding down this interview. It's been awesome to have you here. Before we let you go, I would like to know what your tips for being a Radult would be.
I think something I believe very strongly in, so much so that I've literally putting my money where my mouth is on this. And it has to do with my store giveaway. And it's this, is if you live your life if you're always looking down, if you're not seeing opportunity, if you are, if you think negatively, so you aren't seeing possibilities, then that is the life you're going to live. And it's going to be dull. And I don't think fulfilling. I really don't. At least for me, it wouldn't be. But if you open your eyes and you look up and you see the opportunities in front of you, because you're receptive, you're open to those opportunities, then you can see how incredible the world could really be. And you can make the world whatever you want it to be if you have that attitude and that openness. So that's what I wanted to do by giving away the store. This is exactly the kind of crazy opportunity that I want people out there looking for. There's opportunities that are less dramatic in our everyday lives that we ignore. I did this big thing to get people's attention and maybe make them a little more aware of the opportunities that they're ignoring on a daily basis. So I really believe this. I put my money where my mouth is, and I think that's my number one tip for being a Radult.
I think it's a really good tip.
Me too.
I haven't said this publicly yet, but if you don't mind me plugging it, I'll make my
Go for it.
public announcement here. My next comic book is a political conspiracy thriller called Fake News. And
I love it.
yeah, it's about, it's very far-fetched, but it's about a government creates a space force to fight a war in outer space. I know it's hard to imagine. And it's about a reporter and a few other people who are trying to get to the bottom of whether or not there even is a war or whether or not it's all a big hoax. And I'm really proud of it, and I think it's pretty cool. And the people I've shown it to have said like, oh, well, like, what's next? I'm like, that's all of it. They're like, no, you have to do like the next part now. So I don't know. We'll see what the public decides after I release it. It would be the first true multimedia comic experience. If we did a comic about a podcast with a podcast at the same time, that would be just awesome.
Now, you've just plugged your new project, but we always like to close out by giving our guests a chance to plug everything that they're doing and everything they want people to pay attention to. In your case, that obviously includes your contest to give away your comic book store in Oak Lawn. So I'm just going to give you a minute or so of airtime here to do whatever you want with. Tell people where they should find you and how.
Oh, thanks so much. I appreciate that. I guess I would love it if people, I'm very active on Facebook. So if you would join the Chimera's Comics community on Facebook, it's a safe, judgment-free space to talk about the things that you love. And we try to keep it safe for everybody to enjoy. So Chimera's Comics community, and I'm on there all the time. So it's a good way to find me. Feel free to, you can also find Chimera's Comics Official on Facebook. If you go to my website, if you go to chimerascomics.com, if you're there to sign up for the contest or even just to check out my work, there's a pop-up to send you a free digital comic if you sign up for my email list. So that's also a good thing to do. I email every week and I try to keep it interesting and relevant. Lord knows I do enough crazy stuff that you might want to hear about. And you get a free digital comic to sign up. So that's cool. You can find my first graphic novel, Magnificent, on Amazon or at chimerascomics.com. And you can look for Cellar Door, my horror graphic novel anthology.
So we'll wrap this up now. Thank you very much for joining us. Be sure that if you're in the Chicago area or even just traveling through America, visit Chimera's Comics. Check out the store. Say hi to Carmelo and the rest of the staff. Do not bend comics or throw them on the ground. I will give you an ear twig. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, guys. This was a blast.